Okay, we're going to take a look at Articulate Storyline for just a few minutes. Here is the website that you are on right now. This is what I see, and I'm just using this as a launching point for this link. It's the sentence here: both Storyline and Captivate offer quick guides to use the accessibility features in their products. Let's go to Storyline, and here we're on Articulate. This is their article. This is not eLearning Heroes. This is just articulate.com support. And this is going to tell us what to do. Do we need an e-learning course that's accessible to all learners but not sure where to start? You've come to the right place. Okay, so we have some options here. We can personalize the learner's experience right from the beginning. We can optimize our course for hearing impaired learners, mobility impaired learners, visually impaired learners, and get help when you need it. This is kind of like top level information. Doesn't really dig in deep. Let's go to visually impaired learners because that's kind of the focus of this inquiry. So it just kind of scrolls us down to the bottom, and it says we're going to use the Storyline 360 supports JAWS screen readers with Google Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer. And see this article for supported versions. This is kind of weird because not everybody uses JAWS. If you're not familiar with it, JAWS is a fairly expensive program. Let's see what the street price is for JAWS. Let's see if we have pricing information here. Purchase online, JAWS, screen reader software. It's a $900 piece of software. So there is an alternative. This alternative is called NVDA, and I apologize if you're someone that knows about this already, but it does bear repeating. And we don't want NVIDIA stock, we want NV Access. And to download NVDA, which is kind of neck and neck with JAWS, the version number 2019, it's free, it's only good for PCs, and it's donationware, so if you want to give them some money to keep doing this, they would really appreciate it. And from my experiments and my experience over the years, that NVDA does pretty much the same thing as JAWS when you're working with Articulate. And the one issue that we're going to look at with Storyline, the results are pretty similar for NVDA and JAWS because I've looked at both of these a lot. And also the browser is slightly different. So, it says in other places on my website that you should check with JAWS, NVDA, and VoiceOver. I mean, this is for desktop or laptop computers. You want to use all three of the major screen readers, and you want to use them with Chrome and Firefox and Internet Explorer and Edge and Safari. You got to test this stuff on everything so you don't run into any surprises, because if you look at this site and you look at the other sites that I've pointed to, like the community sites for Captivate and for Storyline, you'll see that the results that developers get are not predictable, even if they follow recommended procedures. So anyway, that's what I had to say about saying that they support just JAWS, Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer. If you have a problem and you contact support, because they've stated this, they might say, well, is this problem with our supported software? So that's kind of a thing. Their first thing to say is to add alternate text for screen readers. I'm not going to go into that. You can look at the guidelines, and you can also look at a million other things about how to use alt text. That's kind of out of scope for this discussion right now. I promise you there's enough material to keep you busy for the rest of your life reading about alt text. Customized tab order. Going back to alt text, I will say that we'll actually do some alt text just to kind of check it off the list. We'll do an example of that, and we'll take a look at that in the application. We'll also customize the tab order, and we'll use a table to structure text for screen readers, and then we'll identify the course language. I'm not really going to do that because if you're listening to me in English, we're just going to assume that English is why you're here. And if it's another language, that's kind of outside of the scope of this website. I wish that different languages got full coverage and that we weren't so English centric, especially in the business world, but that's another discussion. But it does support localization. Storyline does. Customizing the text labels they use the text labels to describe player elements and give instructions to learners, and I actually have done some stuff where I tweaked the labels on the buttons and stuff like that. Yeah, I'll show how to do that. And skip navigation, which I don't know. The Storyline player has two controls at the bottom on regular content slides: previous and next. Either go back or go forward. Skipping the navigation is not really that useful. I mean, Storyline does have like this table of contents that you can use that it does get kind of hairy, but from my experience, the skip navigation feature that is always enabled in Storyline 360 kind of gets in the way of actually navigating these slides quickly. Increase the player font size. We can do that. Provide text-based alternatives for animations. We're not going to get into that. Don't rely on hover states alone to display important information. I've done a thing with like status and states and stuff like that, and I'll probably show that in another video. But the status of a page is kind of always a stumbling block because sometimes the browser and screen reader combination will announce what's happening when you load a new page or when the page changes, and sometimes it won't. So it's always inconsistent. Provide alternatives for drag and drop and hotspot interactions. I'm glad that they've included these tools, but they don't work with screen readers ever. Just avoid them like the plague. And I'm sorry for saying that, but it's a rat hole that you're going to get lost down. You have to be able to explain why some of the features that these programs have, like animation and drag and drop and hotspot interactions, why they're only good for a portion of the users, and they're like detrimental to other users. So if a stakeholder on a project says that they want to have drag and drop, then the immediate ramification of that is you're going to be building everything twice. Don't autoplay videos. I can agree with that. Have high contrast ratio. I don't really talk a lot about contrast ratio on the screen, but it is important. Don't rely on color alone to convey meaning. Yeah, so look at the WCAG, read it, read all the commentary you can get a hold of, and you're going to find like everybody's just dishing out this same litany of what to do, and it is a good way to go and, you know, internalize it, try to always do it. But what I'm lacking here, you know, I'm getting a bunch of do this and don't do this, but we're not really getting a lot of like before and after things. We're not getting a lot of like tutorials that show how this stuff works on the part of the software publishers. So they've got an ebook on designing accessible e-learning, how to comply with Section 508 accessibility guidelines, and WCAG. Look at that, you know, see what you can glean, but you know, it's just not really informative, and a lot of times it doesn't mirror what the product actually does. And when you need help, just post a question at eLearning Heroes. You know, I think that support communities are fine and everything, but if you've got a real problem, to me, if I have a real problem, that is literally like the last place I'm going to go, because you spend a lot of time just weeding through useless information without finding a solution to what your problem is. And I'm going to qualify what I just said and say, especially when it comes to accessibility on these e-learning sites. And sad but true, but because it's such a deep and complex topic, the dialogue on the community support sites just really don't begin to scratch the surface. Okay, so those are the best practices for Articulate Storyline, and I'm going to go ahead and pause this, and then I'm going to set up a Storyline file, and I'm going to point out how some of these suggestions here have been implemented, and then I'll publish it, and then we'll hit it with NVDA, and we'll kind of see how it does. So I will be back probably in another video instead of like having a really long one. So thank you. Okay, we're back, and we are going to be working in Articulate Storyline. We just have like a brand new file cracked open, and I'm not really going to do a whole lot of customization because I want to illustrate what happens when we're running right out of the box on this stuff. This is Articulate Storyline 360, and it is the latest version as of June 28th, 2019. And I'm just going to get some donor text so we can mess around with it a little bit. So we're just going to grab some text off the WCAG Wikipedia entry. And so we're going to start out with just a regular old background. Then we're going to insert our text box here. I'm going to paste the content in. Okay, so we just have regular old text. The first thing that I want to point out is if I want to put a title here, I can call this introduction. Okay, there's our introduction slide. The title really doesn't convey to the top like it would in a PowerPoint, so I'll just go ahead and have another text box and just call it introduction. Now the problem here is, as I've mentioned before in other parts of this website, Storyline does not offer any kind of structure for headings and stuff like that. So when you're using NVDA or JAWS or VoiceOver and you want to use the shortcuts that on a regular HTML based web page would allow you to get a list of the links on the page or a list of the headings on the page or all of these landmarks and semantic elements, You're not going to get that with Storyline, and that is a huge drawback. The only thing saving it is the simplicity of the navigation, and this is actually kind of in the article that I talked about, that your content has to, in Storyline, your content does have to kind of direct the hierarchy of the page. So keeping your text chunks short and concise and to the point kind of negates the need for doing a lot of landmark hopping on the slide, if that makes any sense. On this particular slide that we're looking at, this is a pretty good length. You can get through it, and then there's not like another 250 words after it. So navigating from the beginning to the end is not really impacted that greatly by the lack of headers or H1s or something like that. So we have a heading at the top that's like its own container, and we could actually label this thing if we wanted to. I would just go to Format. I'll show you, this is a huge bother for me, is that they've tucked the accessibility stuff like all the way down in this menu. It's kind of buried in there, and I'll show you another way to get to it after this, but generally you have to go to Format and then Size and Position, and then you have to enter whatever the accessibility text is for the object here. And sometimes you can enter the alt text and it just doesn't pick up on it, and it still just reads whatever the text is in there. So what I was going to do is I was going to select this, and then I'm just going to say heading introduction. And so this is kind of like my, let's see if that's stuck. This is kind of like my take on kind of introducing some explanatory elements into the alt text of like these text boxes and stuff like that. The other thing is when JAWS hits these, it's going to call it like graphic, or it's going to call it container or something like that, group, I think. It just kind of has like a landmark name for these text boxes that's a little weird. So down here on our timeline, I'm going to go ahead and name this text box too. I'm going to name this heading and then introduction. And then I'm going to name this one main text. Okay. Now the other way that you can get it at alt text stuff is just to hit the tab order thing on the home tab, and now we've got all of the objects on the screen in the default tab order. The default tab order on the page, I'm going to cancel out of this for a second. The default tab order on the page starts in the upper right hand corner, and then it works its way down. So the screen reader is going to see introduction first, and then it's going to see this main text box after that, and then it'll see whatever the navigation buttons are in the player. You can't see the player right now. It only appears once the course has been published. One thing that you can do is you can insert instructions and stuff like that off to the side, and let's see, use only your tab key and enter button or space bar to interact with this course. Okay, so I could put, I kind of actually do always put instructions like this off to one side of the screen. If it's not in the main like canvas area of the screen, it's still contained and it still shows up in the tab order, but a sighted user will not see it. Only screen reader users will get the information, and the only way that a sighted individual will know that something is there is if they tab through all the elements on the page. Anything that's over to the right and kind of hidden for screen reader users is going to cause a little yellow box to show up like right on the upper left hand corner of the screen if you put that text right there. So this is our basic page here. I'm just going to go ahead and publish this, and we'll look at it in the 360 preview environment. And we're just going to call this access text. We're just going to look at this little piece like that. And I guess I should go ahead and start NVDA. There it is. Let me...
Loading NVDA. Please wait. Desktop. Desktop.
Yeah, so one of the things that I like to do is run my audio mixer in another screen so I can not have NVDA talking over me when I'm trying to talk. So it's kind of like a complicated little dance that we do. Okay, I'm going to move this tab back over here so we can look at it. There we go. That looks about right. Okay, so here is our course, and now we're going to let NVDA talk about whatever it wants to talk about. Okay, it's looking good. All right.
Access Text Review 360, Google Chrome Row 1 Column 1.
Okay, now we've got everything here. Now what we've got is like a little table of contents here on the side.
Desktop.
A little table of contents on the side here that's clickable. We've only got one page, so it doesn't really have any use right now. But if we had more than one page, you could click through the page titles. And this is another reason why you want to name everything something meaningful in Storyline, is because it shows up in different places, and if you don't title it, it's just untitled, and that's annoying. So I'm going to start up here, and then I'm just going to kind of use NVDA to just navigate the whole thing. And I'm going to start out by just doing like a read all, which is NVDA key plus A.
Volume mixer speakers, Logitech USB head, okay. Access Text Review 360, Google Chrome Row 1. A. https://306 A. Access Text Review button.
See, it doesn't really do anything to do the shortcut for reading all the information on the page.
Button.
See, it's just not cooperating.
Button. No next annotation.
Yeah, there's not really anything going on there. So let's try using the tab key and see where we get.
Application. Use only your tab key and enter button or spacebar to interact with this course section.
Okay, so you can see that little yellow box, hopefully, unless you're using a screen reader. Visually, you can see a little yellow box, and that indicates the thing that was hidden off the screen for only screen reader audiences. Let's tab again.
Heading, Introduction section.
So section is the word that I was hunting for earlier. It calls each of these containers.
Desktop. Dialog OB.
Each of these containers on the screen is going to be annotated with the term section, I believe. So that's kind of weird.
Desktop. Access application. The first web accessibility guideline was compiled by Greg Vanderheiden and released in January 1995, just after the 1994 Second International Conference on the World Wide Web, WWW2, in Chicago, where Tim Berners-Lee.
Okay, now here's a problem. If you're using a screen reader, you're going to have to listen to both paragraphs of text. You can't parse blocks of text line by line using the arrow keys like you should be able to. that is a huge problem with storyline accessibility, and that's enough to send, some accessibility experts running and screaming and saying that, we shouldn't be using this. I think if you're judicious about how you structure your content, like, it can work, especially if you give your users some instructions on what to expect. I think that, it can work. And this is one of those things that I was mentioning earlier, which is like, the technical documentation about the product will say, well, the tools for accessibility are there, but it's really up to the designer to implement them correctly. And yes, that is true, but no, you can't just say that and like wash your hands of trying to get your product to work with JAWS the way that it's supposed to, or to work with NVDA the way that it's supposed to. Every time you take away one of these tools, you're taking away a user's ability to receive the information in a way that's useful for them, and you're basically making decisions about how they can get what they need. So in the case of this little text box thing here, like, if I don't have the time to listen to the entire 2 paragraphs, then I might tab to the next item and I might miss everything in the second paragraph because, I don't know how long this text block is. It could just go on and on and on. There's no indicator of the information that's contained within it. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and tab again, and we're going to see what we get.
Skip navigation.
Okay, this
Press
is
enter to return to the slide. Button.
Okay, so this is an invisible button. Like, there's no focus indicator on the screen. There's no actual button that says skip navigation. And see, I've already like read everything on the slide. It's at the bottom of after the rest of the content. This does not make any sense whatsoever to me. I mean, it might make sense in some way that I'm not aware of, but as someone with like 10 years of experience doing this, like day in and day out, having it after the content and before the navigation buttons just is kind of silly, because there are only 2 navigation buttons. The next one is going to be previous, and the one after that's going to be next, and we're going to tab through that. And I'm sorry that I'm getting a little like bent out of shape about this, but I really wish that they would allow us to not use that, because skipping 2 buttons is not a big price to pay to let me rephrase that. To have to sit through 2 or 3 different buttons is better than hearing about a button that I'm tempted to push that isn't really going to do anything. So let me push the button and see what happens. So I'm on the button, but I can't tell because there's no focus element, but I'm on it. So I'm going to hit the space bar.
Space.
Nothing. Enter button. See, there's not really much going on. So let's just start all over again.
Use only your tab key and enter button or space bar to interact with this course section.
Okay, so there's our first section. Then we're going to go to the heading.
Heading, Introduction section. The first web accessibility guideline was compiled by...
Okay, there's our text again. Now next we're going to we're going to be on the skip navigation button next. Hit the tab key.
Skip navigation.
Okay, I'm going to
press enter to return to the slide.
I'm going to press enter
Button.
to return to the slide, and let's see what happens. I just pressed enter and it doesn't do anything. This is wrong for 2 reasons. One, this slide is so short and there's so few elements that you're actually going to skip that it's not useful to have this skip navigation button enforced, and 2, it doesn't seem to work. So anyhow, I'm going to try and make it there. Well, since there's only 1 slide, I don't know if the next and previous buttons are going to be very useful, but let's try it again.
Heading.
Yeah. Oh.
The first, skip navigation. Button. Button.
Okay. See, this is kind of ridiculous. The skip navigation button didn't do anything. I mean, it did skip the navigation buttons. It skipped 2 navigation buttons. But the whole process was just ridiculous, because like there was no indication of what happened after I pressed the button. There was no click. There was no, you know, indicator from NVDA that I had actually done something. So in my opinion, the enforced skip navigation button is just perplexing at this point for me. One thing that I didn't do is I didn't set any labels for these enigmatic, down here at the bottom, these
System clock, desktop, desktop.
These navigation buttons don't really say anything when you hit them with JAWS or whatever. So let's go back and let's change a couple of things about the player and stuff, and let's just see if we can mitigate this problem just a little bit, and then cut this video short and move on to the next thing. So what I would do is I would go to this player here, and I would go to text labels, and we're going to find the previous and next buttons. There we go. Okay. So I don't know why it didn't say that that was a next button. It looks like it's set up for it. Okay, previous. There we go. Previous. Previous. And previous. Okay. So we just saved that. And I wonder. So there are our buttons in the player features. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to this player thing again. I want those buttons to actually say something, if at all possible. I'm going to title this entire thing. Accessibility test. Okay. Now see, I want to be able to, oh, I don't want to get Flash Player, hell no. Yeah, I want these buttons to look more like buttons and less like arrows. And I'm just not really seeing the way to do this. Let me change this to a different type of let's try this. Let's try and use a oh wait, here, button styles, navigation, icon, and text. There we go. So hopefully this is going to help with that navigation. Now I'm going to go in, I'm going to name my scenes. I'm going to go to story view, and I'm going to name this chapter introduction. Or no, I'm going to name this chapter 1. Okay. And I'm just going to add another slide so we can have something to navigate to. I'm just going to duplicate this, and this is a good strategy if you're doing custom accessibility things on each page. Just duplicate your pages so everything carries from one slide to the next. You don't have to change any huge things in order to you know, continue forward. You don't have to reconfigure your slide every single time. So here are the guidelines for web content accessibility, and they're huge. Let's try this. Control X. Let's try putting some of these in a table, like the guidelines said. So insert a table here, and let's just have. Oh, that's not a great table. Can I add things to my table here? Yeah, insert rows below. It doesn't ask me how many. Format this table. Let's just keep going down. Okay, and we can just go ahead and 86 this heading. Actually, I'm not going to 86 the heading. I'm going to give it a different name. WCAG guidelines. Okay. There we go. Okay, this. Okay, grab this text box and move it where I want it. There. And run it out to the sides a little bit. Okay. So how many we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's just grab 10 of these guidelines, and hopefully they'll just cut and paste like directly in there without having to do them one at a time. No. Okay, so that means that we're doing this. No, just give me one. Nope. Okay, here's 2. For some reason, my keyboard shortcuts are not doing what I want them to do exactly. Yeah, I just kind of want to apologize that my stuff is not more polished. But, you know, it is what it is, and it's something. So okay, what's actually going on here is that the screen recorder is causing a lot of lag. It's going to delete these rows. This will get the point across, I believe. Let me delete this row. And so let's do some accessibility stuff. Remember, we go to home, then tab order, and then we can see all the things that have alt text attached to them. And this heading, introduction, WCAG, guidelines, it's still got the alt text from the previous slide because we cloned it. So I can just go heading, and then I can say WCAG And here's our table introduction that talks about the structure of the table. And there's our heading. So let's just say that these are guidelines 1 through 5. Let's take this guy and move it back up here. So there's our table, and that's all pretty good. Did I say I was going to do anything else here? Let's see. I was going to mobility impaired users want visual. Okay. Alternate text for screen reader users. Let's just go ahead and duplicate this slide, and let's give this a meaningful title. I don't know what's going on. I think that, I hate to do this, but I think that NVDA is going to have to go for a minute. I think doing all of these things at the same time is kind of making everybody freak out. So and this is going to be alt text. And what's really hilarious is that my caps lock key is now doing the opposite of what it's supposed to. When the light is on, it types in all lowercase, so that's really weird. So let me go to this page. We're going to get rid of this table in entirety. If it will just go away, that would be good. Or we can just get rid of the whole thing. Okay, and then we're just going to call this guy alt text. Yeah, everything is just like completely freaked out right now. Let's save this and get out of here and come back to it. Yeah, everything is just like completely freaked out. So let's close it. And we'll reopen it. It's not looking good for storyline. Well, actually, you know, it is what it is, and if you're doing e-learning, it's, you know, it's a major player, and someone's going to ask you to use it. So it's better to figure out how to try and make it work than it is to just flatly say, well, it's not accessible, you know, or whatever, because it can be made to do what you need it to do. And what's the alternative? Flat HTML. Like, really, seriously. Let's see. There we go. There's our accessibility test. Let's close this guy completely. Don't save the new project, just open the one that I want. So we're going to add some alt text for screen readers. See, look at this. It's like completely like not what it looked like when I was working on it. And I'm double clicking on the slide, and it is like just not like this is not behaving like it's supposed to. It's just completely glitching out right and left. So this table here Yeah, it's supposed to be shuffling through these slides. Alright, abort, abort, danger, Will Robinson. We have reached maximum glitchiness, so I'm going to stop this video. Okay, because we were just really freaking out there for a minute. Let's see if this file is completely corrupted. I shut down the computer and just started everything back up again. So let's just try and move. There we go. Yeah, so that's good. Let's go ahead and pick this guy up and move it back over to this slide. And then here's our WCAG guidelines. We don't want that anymore. We want it to say alt text. It's alternative text, but everybody just calls it alt text. Then we go to our tab order and change our heading. Okay, and we need an image, so let me just find a good image to use. There's a way to do this in Articulate, but you know, I don't want to do like a whole lot of advertising for them. Here's our alt text. There seems to be a limit to the number of characters, and like 125 seems to be the upper limit of the characters. Otherwise it just gets to be too much for the screen reader. It seems to break the flow of the main text, probably because you can't hit it line by line. So let's just set some regular alt text for this tab order. Here's our picture. Doesn't have a name. We'll name it something else, but for the alt text we'll say that it's a ASUS laptop open and running Windows 10. Okay, and let's give our picture a name. Okay, and this, I want to go back and I want to rename these text boxes too. I'm just going to call it instructions. Control C. And this is just kind of an e-learning tip for Storyline and for Captivate, is that you just want to name stuff what it is. It helps if you ever have to pass your thing off to somebody else. It also helps if you have to pass the thing off to yourself and you go back in after you haven't been in for like a year or two, trying to remember how you put the thing together. If you have meaningful names for all of your components, it just really helps a lot. Let's throw some text in here. Let's just insert a text box and just give it some, you guessed it, some text. Let me just find something about a laptop or something. Let's do something about ASUS. Let's give ASUS some product placement in my tutorial video. I'm sure that they love that. Okay. Boy, it's hard finding text on their actual website. So abandoning that idea, we're going to go to a secondary source to get their information, because their website was not super helpful. There we go. I think we can do this. There we go. Insert our text box. Okay, so this is a friendly little amount of text. It'll be interesting to hear it being read. And I don't want it to be text box 1. Let's call this ASUS text. Okay, so now we've done some work to improve the accessibility of this courselet, and this is just some of the basics. I don't know if I'm ready to do it just yet. Alternative text. I'm back on the articulate guidelines. Add alternative text, customize the tab order, use tables to structure text for screen readers, identify the course language for screen readers. We can just go ahead and do it. Home on the storyline ribbon and click player, and then the text labels, and select the language from the drop down list. Okay, English is probably what it says, so that would be my guess. And click on text labels as soon as it gets done crunching. It's thinking about something. It's probably this preview in this window here. Well, we're waiting for that to finish doing whatever it's going to do, if it ever finishes. There we go. Customize the text labels, and we did do that. Down here, the text labels for these buttons, we customized those. Allow learners to skip repetitive player navigation. You got to listen to me blow a gasket about that. Increase the player font size. As the course author, you have complete control over the size of the text. Okay, so if we go to colors and effects on the player menu and the player font size, why don't we make it 150%? And wow, that actually looks pretty good. I'm glad I didn't gloss over that. Animations, hover states, drag and drop, don't even get me started. Videos, high contrast, don't rely on color to convey meaning. Offer an audio alternative to on-screen text. Yeah, I don't know how good this text-to-speech thing is. Maybe it's good. I used it. I keep getting conflated between Captivate and Storyline because I've been in both of them so much working on this website. So the text-to-speech thing does actually work pretty good. You just have to, I mean, I could record it. I could record something, you know, and then it would play. But my concern is conflicting with the screen reader. And then the other concern is that if something changes in the lesson, then all of that content has to be changed. So those are just considerations. I generally try to let the screen reader do the heavy lifting for people who want to have content read to them. The text-to-speech thing might be okay. Let's just go ahead and let's just take this guy here, and we'll copy it, we'll paste it, and we're going to call this audio. And remember, we have to change the alt text, change it to audio, save, and then let's just have the screen reader read something, not the screen reader, but the storyline itself, have it read something to us. I mean, it does kind of seem like the right thing to do, but once again, you know, you have to pick and choose how much resources you have. So let's take this guy here and grab all the text, and we're going to copy it, and then we're going to go here to insert audio, text to speech, and we're going to enter our text to speech here, paste it, and we'll have Joanna read it, and we'll insert it here into the slide. It'll stay with this slide. Now it's part of the media library, and it's possible, you know, that we're going to be stuck on this slide for 40 seconds while the computer voice reads this thing. If we lock down the slide order and we say that you can't get to slide number 3 unless that you've been to slide number 1 and slide number 2, then, you know, you just have to consider that if I'm a visual learner and I'm looking at a slide that has this much text, it only takes me like 10 seconds to read it and I retain it, then what's the rationale for holding me on a slide for longer than I need? So if you're going to use audio, you have to factor in the time that it takes to read it all. I guarantee you that if someone is using a screen reader all the time, they have the speed on that thing jacked up to like 110, 125%. Like, people who don't use screen readers can't believe how fast the screen reader is for people who are really adept at using them. Okay, so to make this audio play, I'm going to need to add a trigger that starts the media, and here's our text to speech, and then we're going to do it when the timeline starts, but we're going to do it when the timeline reaches. I'm going to give it like 4 seconds, and that'll give the screen reader time to settle down before the audio starts, and hopefully it will not conflict, but it might. You know, that's always a possibility. So I'm going to save, and then let's just go ahead and publish this guy. And I'm going to go, as soon as it's done publishing, I'm going to save this and close it down. We're just going to focus on running through this thing with NVDA for a few minutes, and then I'm going to get out of it, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the final thing, which is the multiple choice question, because I definitely want to talk about that, because they didn't even address that in the tips and tricks, you know, and all those other links for tips and tricks that were on the page that we were on. They really don't like address the multiple choice questions like very much either. And to me, like, those scored assessments are kind of like the main reason why anyone builds anything using Captivate or Storyline. It's that interactive part and the ability to give somebody a quiz and record their score without having to program it all in a scripting language or something like that. That's the main reason why people use Storyline and Captivate. And if it can't produce a scored assessment or a multiple choice quiz or something like that that is easy to navigate using a screen reader, then, like, what's the point? Because it doesn't work. So anyway, down off my soapbox once more. Let's get NVDA going. And see already kind of the structure of this thing has improved a bit. And I'm going to have to go to my mixer again, I think, because I imagine NVDA has been silenced. So I'm just going to explore this thing, and I'm going to just keep my mouth shut for a minute, and we're just going to just listen to what NVDA does, and pay attention on the screen if you can see it, how the yellow focus ring moves around the screen. Okay, and all right, so we'll check this out, and I'm just going to be quiet for a while.
And volume mixer speed desktop. Access Text Review 360, Google Chrome row 1 column 1. Access Text Review 300 and Access Text Review 360 document, visited link content.
Okay, so I'm just going to be using the tab key and the enter key to navigate.
Application, menu. Use only your tab key and enter button or spacebar to interact with this course section. Heading, Introduction section. The first Web Accessibility Guideline was compiled by Greg Vanderheiden and released in January 1995, just after the 1994 Second International Conference on the World Wide Web, WWW2.
Okay, I'm going to move past this.
Skip navigation. Press enter to return to the slide. Button.
I'm not going to do skip navigation this time.
Previous button. Next button. Menu, active button.
Okay, we can go into this menu if I press the enter key, I believe. Okay, it doesn't give me an indicator, but I think if I use the arrow keys to go up and down, I can get at these page titles. And that's not true. Okay, so I'm not doing it right. I'm just going to tab again. Oh, there we go.
Tree view expanded, level 2 introduction, 1 of 4, active introduction 1 of 1.
Okay, this is where I can use the arrow keys. For some reason, that's okay right now.
WCAG guidelines, 2 of 4 WCAG guidelines 1 of 1 level 2. Alt text. Introduction.
Down arrow doesn't work anymore.
Alt text.
Going back
3
up.
of 4 alt text 1 of 1 level 2. WCAG guidelines. Introduction. Level 1 chapter 1. 1 of 1 chapter 1 1 of 1.
Yeah, this is... I think that if instructions were given at the beginning of the module, and maybe even like a little exercise kind of, simulating this or something, because using this is unintuitive and it doesn't resemble the controls for anything else. It's really idiosyncratic, and the best thing that I can say about it is that it's hard to get stuck in the menu unintentionally. That's as far as I'm going to go with that. I'm going to keep using the tab key.
Resources link. Volume button. Visited link content button. View site information menu button secure. Address and search bar. Access text review 300. Use only your tab. Heading. Introduction section. The first web skip navigation. Previous button. Next button.
Enter for next button.
Visited link content.
Okay, now we're on the page with the table. So we'll see what happens. Just using the tab key.
Application. Use only your tab key and enter button or spacebar to interact with this course section. Heading. WCAG guidelines section. Table with 1 columns and 5 rows section. Guidelines 1 through 5 section. Guideline 1, provide equivalent. Guideline 2. Guideline 3. Guideline 4. Skip navigation. Previous button. Next button.
I'm going to go back to that table real quick before we move on. I'm going to see if the arrow keys will work.
Menu. Active button. Tree view expanded. Resources. Volume button. Visited link content. View site information. Address. Use table with 1 columns and 5 rows section.
Okay, I'm going to use the arrow key and see what happens. Down arrow, nothing. Up arrow, nothing. Tab again.
Guidelines 1 through 5 section.
It doesn't say that that's the header of the table, and it doesn't even really say table, so that's kind of weird too. I think it just says section. I think it, because you remember when we set it up, it was the table information was just alt text for this row. Like this, it's not hitting the table like it would if it were conventional HTML. This is some kind of proprietary way that they've done a table. Let's try the arrow key and see if it navigates that way. No. So we're just stuck with the tab key to do these tables. I wish I had done more columns.
Guideline 1. Guideline 2. Guideline 4. Skip navigation. Previous button. Next button. Visited link content.
Okay. So we're not getting this thing here, this accessibility test. It's
Access text.
Hang on. It's not reading that to me. So
Introduction.
hang
Desktop.
on. So it's reading this access test, which is the title of that chapter, I believe. So anyway,
Volume mixer speakers.
let's go back. Let's go back over
Access
here.
text review 360. Heading. Alt text section. Asus laptop open and running Windows 10 graphic.
Okay, so that's alt text. That's what it does. The kicker with alt text is you got to write it correctly. It's got to be short and to the point, and it's got to be just a concrete description of what's in the page visually, and it can't have too many details. Okay, so continuing to use the tab key.
Asus was founded in Taipei in 1989.
Great.
Next button.
Okay.
Visited link content.
Now we've got our audio that should kick in.
Some learners
Here
may
we
be
go.
able to see your course but prefer to listen rather than read. They might have learning disabilities such as dyslexia, or they might not be strong readers. Or perhaps your course language is a second language for them. Consider offering an audio version of text-based slides for these learners. For example, you might play
Desktop.
optional narration when learners click a speaker icon or press a keyboard shortcut. H.T. Jane Bossert. And if recording narration.
Okay. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to go back to the previous thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the audio start. And then I'm going to start trying to navigate through it with the tab key. And this is going to sort of illustrate my concerns about the narration running over the screen reader. And it's probable that screen reader users are already used to this. Like if they go to YouTube and are listening to videos, like they can probably figure out, you know, how to operate with two voices talking to them at the same time. You know, I think a lot of people would be able to handle that, but there are also a lot of people who like that would be very distracting for them, and maybe they couldn't pay attention very well with two voices going on at the same time. And once again, there's no right answer. There are guidelines, there are recommendations, but also it depends on who you ask. So anyway, I'm going to go back and we're going to turn everything back on, and we're going to try this thing again, but with potentially conflicting audio sources.
Volume mixer speakers. Logitech USB head. Access. Desktop. Asus laptop open. Asus was founded in. Skip nav. Previous button. Next button.
Okay, here we go.
Menu. Active button.
Whoops. Okay, shift tab will make you run backwards through all of the elements. So I'm going to shift and then tab.
Next button.
Enter.
Visited link content.
Okay. Now it's going to start, and I'm going to try and tab through everything. Here she comes. Oh, I had turned everything down. Here we go. Let me turn it back up.
Perhaps your course language
Slider,
is a second
volume
language
button.
for them. Consider offering an audio version of text-based slides.
Okay, sorry for the false
Tree
start.
view expanded.
Let's try it
Alt
again.
text. Application. Heading. Asus laptop open and running Windows 10 graphic. Asus. Skip navigate. Previous button. Next button. Visited link content.
Okay, now she's coming this time for
Some
sure.
learners may be
There
able
we go.
to see your course but prefer to
Okay.
listen rather than read. They might have learning
Application.
disabilities such as
Use only your
dyslexia,
tab
or
key
they
and
might
enter
not be
button
strong
or space
readers.
bar to
Or perhaps
heading,
your course
audio
language is a
section.
second language for them.
Some learners may be able to
Consider
see your
offering an
course
audio
but
version
prefer
of
to listen.
text-based slides for
Skip
these learners.
navigation.
For example,
Previous button.
you might play
Next
optional
button.
narration when
Menu.
learners click a speaker icon
Tree
or
view
press a
expanded.
keyboard shortcut.
Resources list.
HT Jane
Volume
Blosser.
button.
And if recording narration seems a bit overwhelming, let Storyline quickly convert your text
Slider
to speech.
1.
You can even
Zero.
choose the voice and language. Every word sounds right. Check out this user guide and video
Visited
demo.
link view site address access application menu active button.
Okay, so that is a quick little demo of everything at a top level that is applicable to visual impairment that's given in the Articulate Storyline self-guide. And yes, there are more detailed instructions somewhere, but you know, this is just kind of what the company was crowing about. And it's not really that horrible, but it really like strips away a lot of useful stuff in JAWS and kind of reverts back to this really simplistic sort of way of navigating and interacting with the information. But I think so far it's not an inaccessible. So anybody that says that Storyline is like completely incompatible with JAWS and can't be done, I think that there are workarounds that make it easier for someone who uses JAWS to understand that the controls have changed. So if you include that information, you can definitely do a presentation that's kind of flexible. The problem is when we start getting into the assessments and the multiple choice stuff. So I'm going to do that in the next video. Thank you for paying attention.
Desktop.
And I'm sorry that this stuff is taking so long, but personally I feel like you have to kind of like get down in the weeds and mess with this stuff over and over and over again to even like get any kind of intuition of how it works. And plus that, I like to talk a lot. So and anyway, thank you.